When my mother told me I was adopted, I remember the way her hands trembled. Not visibly, but in that subtle way you feel when someone's holding a lie and trying to make it sound like love. I was 15. She sat at the edge of my bed, the evening sun slicing our old curtains in half light and shadow. There was a long pause before she spoke, a stillness so heavy that even the ceiling fan seemed to falter. "I have something important to tell you," she began, voice caught somewhere between confession and prayer. That was the day she told me that she hadn't been able to have children, and that I was adopted. She said it with quiet reverence, as if I'd been chosen, not hidden. I remember pulling my knees to my chest, staring at her pale green eyes, eyes that looked so much like mine, and wondering why I had never noticed before how much we looked alike. Back then, I wanted to believe her. I needed to. For years, I carried that story like a delicate porcelain bowl, something fragile and precious, too sacred to question. Being adopted became the explanation for everything I didn't understand in our little town. Why no one ever spoke about my early years. Why there were no baby pictures before I turned 3. Why my birthday felt more like an anniversary of something mourned than celebrated. But if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep you bury it. I grew up in a small coastal town, a place where the smell of salt and gossip travelled through the same breeze. My mother, Elise, worked as a school librarian, a woman of quiet grace. Her days were filled with neatly ironed blouses, worn paperbacks, and the faint scent of lavender soap. She raised me on her own, though there was always a trace of loneliness in the way she lingered at windows or touched my hair without saying anything. Our house stood at the edge of an overgrown street that led to the cliffs. The porch creaked, the kitchen clock ticked louder than necessary, and the kettle never quite whistled the same way twice. Life was simple, until I learned to see between the silences. On Sundays, we'd walk to church, her gloved hand holding mine tight. After service, she'd chat with her best friend Marcia, a woman with a laugh like wind chimes, and a son, Daniel, who was a year older than me. The two of them had been inseparable for as long as I could remember. Marcia was our neighbour, the kind of woman who insisted on bringing over blueberry pies and keeping secrets better than sugar. Looking back, I realised there was always something unspoken between them. Small glances exchanged, pauses in conversation that lasted a beat too long. But as a child, you learn to accept the patterns of behaviour around you without question. I went through high school carrying the knowledge of being adopted like a quiet badge. It made me feel special, unique, even mysterious. Mum would say, "You were meant to find me." I clung to that, even when teachers asked about family medical history or when classmates joked about who I might really look like. Those questions never hurt much because I trusted her story completely. Then came college, new city, new air, and a new kind of distance. Mum called every day, sometimes twice. Her voice always hovered between pride and fear, as though she was proud of the woman I was becoming but terrified of what I might discover if I strayed too far. I brushed it off as maternal worry. During my second year, she suffered a stroke. It was mild, but it changed everything. I moved back home for the summer to take care of her. That was when the walls of that small lavender-scented house began to whisper truths I wasn't ready to hear. I still remember the first night I noticed something strange. I was organising her documents, bills, hospital forms, medical papers, trying to make sense of her chaotic filing system. Mum was asleep in the next room, the soft hum of her oxygen machine echoing through the walls. Tucked deep inside a folder marked insurance, I found an old envelope. The name written on it, for Elise, was faded, but the handwriting struck me instantly. I couldn't explain it, but it felt familiar. Inside, there were several printed emails from the early 2000s, neatly folded. The subject line of the first one read, "We can't let her find out." I didn't understand what I was reading at first. The exchange was between someone named T and my mother. The messages were emotional, fragmented, and full of guilt. Words like mistake, family, truth, and forgiveness stood out like bruises on the page. I tried to convince myself they were about me, maybe the adoption, maybe the reasons she couldn't tell me more. But the deeper I dug, the harder it became to believe that story. One particular line from T broke something inside me. If Marcia ever finds out, it'll destroy both families. I froze. Marcia, my mother's best friend. That night, as Mom slept, I sat in the kitchen staring at those emails, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sound of the rain. I told myself there had to be an explanation. There always was with her. She was meticulous, thoughtful, measured. She wouldn't have lied, not about something as big as my origin. And yet, every word in those emails sounded like the kind of truth she'd fought her whole life to suppress. I placed the envelope back, exactly how I found it. I told myself I'd ask her the next morning, but I didn't. Something in me hesitated. Maybe fear, maybe loyalty, maybe both. That summer became a dance of silence. I'd make her breakfast, help her with her medication, and sit through old movies with her in the afternoons, pretending nothing had changed. But every time she smiled at me, I saw the tension behind it. The way her lips quivered, the way her gaze flickered away when I asked about the past. I started noticing little things I'd never seen before. How she avoided talking about my first 2 birthdays, how Marcia always changed the subject when the topic of my childhood came up, how both women seemed to inherit a kind of shared guilt. One afternoon, Marcia visited. They spoke in hushed tones in the living room, unaware that I was in the hallway. Their voices were muffled by the hum of the ceiling fan, but one line from Marcia pierced through clearly. "She doesn't know, does she?" I didn't hear my mother's reply, but her silence, sharp and deliberate, was answer enough. And that's how it started. The unravelling. The unravelling began slowly, like a thread snagged on a nail. One tug, and everything started to come apart. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, not to become one of those people who read into things that weren't there. But once you notice a secret, it's impossible to unsee it. That week, I avoided Marcia. She came by twice, each time carrying a casserole and her usual bright smile, but beneath the surface she seemed uneasy. Her laughter didn't reach her eyes. And my mother, sitting by the window with her blanket tucked neatly around her knees, behaved as though nothing had happened. It was a performance between 2 women who had rehearsed their lines for decades. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the attic, a place I'd rarely gone growing up. The air smelled of old paper and cedar, and dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight like tiny ghosts. Boxes lined the floor, stacked unevenly, some labelled with fading marker. Christmas, photos, receipts. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but I found it anyway. A small unmarked shoebox tucked behind an old trunk. Inside were photographs, some I'd never seen before. In one of them, my mother stood beside a man, tall, sandy-haired, with kind but weary eyes. They were both laughing, the kind of laughter you can feel just looking at it. He wasn't familiar. On the back of the photograph, in my mother's tidy handwriting, were the words, "Summer 1996. I was born that year." Next to that picture was another, of Marcia, smiling, holding a newborn baby. The same man stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse hammering in my ears. The connections were too tangled to make sense of instantly. But one thing was clear. The story I'd been told all my life wasn't whole. When I looked closer at the other photographs, I noticed something that made my breath catch. A small bracelet on the baby's wrist, with tiny engraved letters. AM. Those were my initials. I sank to the floor, the picture trembling in my hand. A part of me wanted to destroy it, to pretend I hadn't seen any of this. But another part, the part shaped by years of unanswered questions, wanted every detail. The next morning, I couldn't look at her the same way. She sat at the table sipping her tea, steam softening the lines on her face. She looked fragile, peaceful. She looked like my mother. "Mum," I began quietly, "who's the man in those old pictures in the attic?" Her hand froze mid-air, the cup just short of her lips. The colour drained from her face. "What pictures?" "You know which ones," I said, trying to sound calm. "The ones from 1996. You and Marcia and that man." She placed the cup down carefully, like every movement was being measured. "You shouldn't have gone through my things," she said finally, her voice tremoring between irritation and fear. "I wasn't snooping," I said. "I was organising and I found them, that's all. I just want to understand." For a moment there was silence, so heavy it almost hummed. Then she sighed, a soft, defeated sound. "His name was Thomas," she said, almost whispering. "Thomas who?" "Thomas Blake." The name hit me like cold water. Blake. That was Marcia's last name. I felt something twist in my stomach. Marcia's husband, Thomas Blake. She didn't reply. Her eyes were glistening, but her lips stayed pressed tight. That silence told me more than words ever could. "Were you—" I stopped myself, the question catching in my throat. "Were you in love with him?" Her shoulders sagged. She looked down at her trembling hands. "It wasn't love. It was a mistake. A terrible, human mistake." My breath came out unsteady. "So, the adoption—" "There was no adoption," she said sharply, as if cutting off the lie before it could breathe again. "There was you. You were born from something wrong and I didn't know how to explain it. Thomas was married to my best friend, and I couldn't destroy her life. I couldn't face the shame, so I told everyone I adopted you." The words pierced through me, slicing years of trust in one confession. My chest felt hollow, like air alone wasn't enough anymore. "Does Marcia know?" I managed to ask. She shook her head. "No. I thought I could keep it buried forever." Marcia struggled with miscarriages, and when I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't bear her knowing the truth. She thought I adopted you too. She helped me with everything. I pressed my palms to my face. The cruelty wasn't deliberate. It was born of fear. But it hurt just the same. That night I couldn't stay in the house. The air felt too thin, too full of ghosts. I drove down to the cliffs, the same place she used to take me when I was younger. The sea was black and endless, the wind cutting cold against my cheeks. I sat there for hours replaying her words, trying to find some version of truth where I could still forgive her. But forgiveness felt far away. What she'd done wasn't just a lie, it was my life rewritten for the sake of her shame. I realised then that I needed to know the other side of the story. I needed to meet Thomas Blake. He and Marcia had moved away years ago after his retirement. I remembered their old family Christmas cards, the kind my mother never threw away. They'd listed an address in Asheville, North Carolina. That's where I decided to go. When I told my mother, she didn't try to stop me. She only said, "Please don't hate him. He didn't know about you, not for sure." There was something in that phrase, "not for sure," that told me. There was even more to uncover. I packed a small bag, printed the address from an old envelope in Marcia's cards, and left town the next morning. The drive was 8 hours, but it felt shorter than expected. Every mile felt like a question, every stretch of highway like a thread pulling me toward the truth. By the time I reached the house, a modest 2-story cabin overlooking a lake, the sun was dipping behind the trees. I parked across the street, my heart pounding as I sat there, staring at the front porch where a man was reading the newspaper. His hair was mostly grey now, but his face was unmistakable. Thomas Blake. My hands were shaking as I got out of the car and walked toward him. "Mr. Blake?" I called softly. He looked up from his paper, his eyes narrowing in polite confusion. "Yes?" I hesitated, then said, "My name is Anna." He nodded slowly. "Nice to meet you, Anna. How can I help you?" I swallowed hard, steadying my voice. I think you might be my father. He didn't answer right away. The newspaper slipped slightly from his hands, brushing his knee as he studied my face. His eyes, light blue, edged with a tired kind of warmth, searched mine like he was looking for something familiar, something buried. I'm sorry, he said after a long pause, his voice low. What did you just say? I took a breath that seemed to scrape against my ribs. I think you're my father. I know it's a lot, and I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to know the truth. For a moment, silence wrapped around us. The air between us was thick with disbelief and something unspeakably human. Fear, maybe, or regret. He stood slowly, the chair legs scraping against the wooden deck. You should come inside, he said finally. We shouldn't talk out here. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and ash. Photos covered the mantel, family pictures, holidays, grandchildren. At the centre, a framed portrait of Marcia. Her smile was frozen in time, radiant and trusting. My stomach twisted. Is Marcia here? I asked cautiously. He shook his head. She passed 3 years ago. Cancer. For a brief moment, grief flickered across his face, softening the years that lay heavy on him. Then he gestured for me to sit. You said your name is Anna? He asked, settling into a chair across from me. I nodded. Anna Rivers. He tilted his head slightly. Rivers, Elise's last name. The way he said her name, soft, careful, made my throat tighten. You know her then? He nodded again, slowly this time. Yes, I did. A long time ago. Why don't you tell me what brought you here, Anna? I told him everything. The adoption story, the emails, the photographs, my mother's confession. I tried to keep my voice steady, but at some point it cracked, under the weight of all the years I'd carried a false identity. When I finished, he just sat there, silent, hands clasped, eyes fixed somewhere beyond me. I need to ask, I said softly. Did you know? Back then? Did you know she had me? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, exhaling slowly. No, he said finally. Not for sure. Elise told me she'd lost the baby. She said it was better that way. I didn't question her. I thought it was her decision, her burden. Marcia and I were rebuilding our life. I had no right to interfere. There was shame in his tone, genuine, weary shame. I stared at him, searching for fragments of myself in his face, the shape of his jaw, the way his brow furrowed when he spoke. It wasn't perfect resemblance, but something about him felt like home, like recognition. Why didn't you try to find out? I asked quietly. Didn't you wonder? About me? I did, he said, for years. But Elise made it clear she wanted to protect everyone. Marcia, the families, and especially you. She said no good would come from digging up the past. Protection, I repeated under my breath. That's what she calls it too. He winced slightly, guilt shadowing his features. She was always strong, too strong sometimes for her own heart. We sat in silence for a while, the sound of ticking filling the room. Eventually he reached for a small box on the shelf beside him. After Marcia passed, I kept some of her things, he said. Letters, photos, memories. I think there's something you should see. He opened the box and pulled out a stack of letters tied with a faded string. He handed me one, the paper yellowed but the ink still clear. The handwriting was my mother's. It was dated October 1996. I unfolded it carefully, my pulse pounding. Tom, I can't let her grow up in this shadow. You have your family, and she deserves to be loved without shame. Please understand. I need to do what's right. You'll always be part of her, but she will never know. I can't be the woman who ruins another's home. My hands trembled as I put the letter down. She hid me to save you, I said quietly. He nodded, eyes wet. And she destroyed herself in the process. Something broke inside me, an aching mix of anger and compassion. For years I'd seen her as my quiet, steadfast mother. Now I saw a woman cornered by love and guilt, making impossible decisions. I stayed there for 2 hours, talking through the fragments of our intertwined past. He told me about his marriage to Marcia, how she had struggled to conceive, how Elise had become her support and closest friend during those years. It started innocently, he said. Late-night talks, shared grief, emotional closeness that turned into something neither of them meant to happen. When Elise found out she was pregnant, she wanted to disappear. She told no one but him. He had offered to leave Marcia, but Elise refused. She said Marcia needed him more. Listening to him, I understood why the lie had grown so roots deep. It had been built on sacrifice, a painful, misguided kind of love. Before I left, he asked, "What will you do now?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think I need time. I need to talk to her again." He nodded, standing to walk me to the door. "She was a good woman," he said quietly. "But good people can do terrible things when they're trying to protect what they love." As I turned to leave, he added, "Anna, I'm sorry. For all of it." I looked back at him, this stranger who was my father, and said, "Maybe one day I'll be ready to forgive." Out on the porch, the lake shimmered under the late sun, and for the first time I felt the strange peace that follows truth, the kind that hurts but heals at the same time. The drive home was long. I didn't play any music. I didn't call anyone. I just drove, hands gripping the wheel, my reflection in the darkening windshield almost unrecognizable. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the porch light was on. My mother must have been waiting. She stood at the door as I got out, her eyes searching mine. She didn't ask where I'd been. She already knew. And I realized then that this was the moment that would define us, what we chose to say, or not say, in the presence of the truth. My mother was standing by the doorway when I arrived. The porch light cast her in a soft orange glow, the kind that made her look fragile, almost translucent. In her hand, she held a small white envelope. I could tell she had been crying. Her eyes were swollen yet strangely calm, as if she had prepared herself for what was coming. "You went to see him," she said quietly, her voice without accusation. Only certainty. "Yes," I answered. I didn't lie, not anymore. She nodded slowly, motioning for me to come inside. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and rain. The kettle was still warm, and 2 mugs were waiting on the counter, hers and one she must have placed for me, just in case I came home. "Did he tell you everything?" she asked. "He told me enough," I said. "About you, about Marcia, about the choice you made." She sank into her chair, every movement careful, measured. "You hate me, don't you?" I looked at her for a long moment. "No, but I don't understand you." She exhaled shakily and set the envelope on the table between us. "Then I should tell you the whole truth, not the cleaned-up version, not the one I told myself so I could live with it." Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. Thomas wanted to do the right thing, he really did. But I told him not to. I knew what it would look like. Marcia had been my friend since childhood. We shared everything, even our pain. How could I take away her family too? And I was ashamed, Anna. I thought if I buried the truth, I could raise you with dignity. So I left town for a while under the pretense of grief, came back months later, and said I'd adopted a child from a distant cousin. Nobody questioned it." Her fingers traced circles around the coffee mug, eyes fixed on the rising steam. "I watched you grow and promised myself I'd tell you the truth someday. But every year it got harder. Every time I saw you smile, I told myself I was protecting you. Not from him. From me." I listened quietly, trying to hold back the ache that came with every word. The sadness wasn't simple anymore. It had layers now. Fear, love, regret. "You built that lie so carefully," I said softly, that even you started to believe it. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Maybe I did. There was silence for a long time. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. The same clock that had marked our breakfasts and birthdays, now marking the space between us. Finally, she pushed the envelope toward me. These are letters I never sent to Marcia. I wrote them every year on your birthday. I wanted to tell her the truth, but I couldn't. After she got sick, I nearly mailed one, but then she passed before I found the courage. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were several folded pages, each with a date written in the corner. The first was from when I turned 1 year old. I read pieces of it aloud. She's beautiful, Marcia. She looks just like him. Every time I look at her, I see both of you, and it breaks me. But she deserves a life without shame. Maybe one day I'll tell you. Maybe one day I'll forgive myself. I couldn't finish reading. The paper blurred in front of me. Why give these to me now? I asked. Her voice cracked. Because I want you to see me as I am, not as the mother who lied, but as the woman who failed. I don't expect forgiveness, Anna. I just don't want you to spend the rest of your life hating me for being human. I set the letter down slowly. It was strange, the way pity and anger can live side by side in your chest, tugging you in opposite directions. I don't hate you, I said finally. But I can't pretend it doesn't hurt. You took away my choice to know the truth. She nodded. And I'll live with that for the rest of my life. We sat in that kitchen for hours, the night pulling tighter around the house. At some point she asked if I'd told Thomas. No, I said. He knows I found out, but I didn't tell him we talked. He's mourning you in his own way, I think. He said you saved him from losing everything. She gave a faint, sad smile. He's kind. He always was. Then she reached across the table and took my hand, the gesture trembling with years of unsaid words. Whatever happens next, I need you to promise me one thing. Don't let this be the end of your life. Don't build walls because I built mine. Her palm was warm against mine. And even through the betrayal, the mess, the hurt, I felt the truth in her touch. She wasn't lying anymore. A week passed before I visited her again. I needed the space to breathe, to think, to begin piecing my identity back together. During that time, I revisited the cliffs, the beach, all the small corners of my childhood that had shaped me. The strange thing about learning the truth is that it doesn't change your memories, it just changes their meaning. Every birthday photo, every lullaby, every word she'd ever said to me, I began reinterpreting them under this new light. And I realized that while she had lied, the love behind it had been real. Flawed, suffocating, misguided, but real. When I returned home, I found her sitting in the garden, her hands gently pruning the roses. She looked up with a quiet smile. I didn't expect you so soon, she said. I didn't expect to come, I admitted. But I realized I still needed you, maybe for closure, maybe for more than that. She set down the shears, brushing the dirt from her gloves. Closure, she repeated softly. It's a strange word, isn't it? Nothing ever really closes, it just changes shape. I nodded. Maybe that's enough. We didn't talk much after that. Instead, I joined her in the garden, cutting dead branches, clearing weeds, and letting the silence say everything we couldn't. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close to peace. By autumn, I had started writing again. Little essays, family reflections, fragments of thought. Each one felt like an attempt to reclaim my own story, not the one she created, not the one buried in guilt, but the one I was finally telling myself. And in one of those essays, I wrote a line that became my truth. Sometimes love doesn't lie to deceive, it lies to survive. Autumn settled over our town like a long exhale. The trees turned amber, then flame red, shedding their leaves onto the cracked sidewalks I used to race down as a child. The air smelled of wood smoke and distant rain, and for the first time in months, life felt still. My mother and I had fallen into a quiet rhythm. There were no big apologies anymore, no reliving the old lies. Our conversations were smaller now, watering the garden, deciding what to cook for dinner, sharing little notes about books. It was as if we had both silently agreed to stop letting the past dictate every breath. But some nights when the house went still and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, I'd find myself thinking about Thomas. The way his voice had trembled when I told him who I was. The guilt in his eyes when he said he'd never known. One evening, I decided to write him a letter. Not to confront him, not to reopen what had already been laid bare, but to offer something simple. Understanding. Dear Thomas, I began, I want you to know that I don't blame you. None of this can be undone, and I'm not sure it needs to be. I've made peace with knowing that I was born from something complicated, and that doesn't make me less loved. It just makes my story more human. Take care of yourself. You don't owe me anything except the truth you've already given. I never mailed it. Maybe I didn't need to. Sometimes writing is just a way of releasing the heaviness that words can't hold in conversation. 2 months later, he called. His voice was softer this time, almost relieved. Elise visited me, he said quietly. It took me a moment to respond. She did. Yes. Last week. She said she needed to see me one last time, to close what started all those years ago. I didn't ask what they talked about. I could imagine it. 2 people sitting in the shadow of what they once shared, not seeking forgiveness, only understanding. She told me you're writing, he added gently. That you're finding your peace. I'm trying, I said, smiling a little. It's harder than I expected. It always is, he said with a sigh. But that's the work of being alive, isn't it? Finding peace in the mess. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long while, realizing that even in this tangled family, built on secrecy and guilt, we were all searching for the same thing, peace. Winter came quietly. The garden died down, the roses trimmed for the season. My mother spent most of her days reading by the window, wrapped in a quilt. Her health began to wane again, the aftermath of her earlier stroke catching up. One evening, I came home to find her asleep in her armchair, a half-read book on her lap. I stood there for a long moment, watching her chest rise and fall, the lines on her face softened by lamplight. She looked peaceful, almost childlike. For a fleeting second, I felt like the years between us had folded in on themselves, back before the lie, back before the truth. Just a mother and her daughter, suspended in love. When she woke, she smiled at me weakly. You remember the first time I told you we were a family of 2? I nodded. By the cliffs. I was 10. You said we didn't need anyone else. Her smile turned sad. I believed that. But everyone needs someone, Anna. Promise me you won't live a life built entirely on strength. I promise, I said softly. Her eyes glistened and she whispered, You were the best thing I ever did wrong. That was the first time I saw her cry without guilt in her eyes. She passed quietly 3 months later, just before spring. The nurses said it was peaceful. No pain, no lingering struggle. I wished I'd been there in her final moment, but part of me believed she wanted to leave alone, as she'd lived much of her life, on her own terms, even in regret. After the funeral, I went through her things one last time. Among the books, I found a small sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a short note written in her careful, deliberate handwriting. My dear Anna, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've already learned everything I kept from you. I need you to know this. None of it was out of shame for you. You were my greatest joy, the part of me that was untouched by the mistakes I made. If love is the measure of a life, then I lived fully because of you. Mom. I pressed the note to my chest and let myself sob, not for her lies this time, but for the love that outlived them. That summer, I decided to leave our town. I sold the house, donated most of her clothes and books, and kept only a few things: a scarf that still smelled faintly of lavender, and the little wooden clock from the kitchen. I drove for 2 days until I reached the mountains, where I rented a small cabin to start over. I began writing my story, not out of vengeance but reflection. The first line came easily, as if it had waited for me all along. My mother told me I was adopted, but what she really gave me was the story of who she was and who I could choose to become. It became a memoir of sorts, not about betrayal, but about the delicate ways love and failure intertwine. I poured every truth into those pages: the heartbreak, the compassion, the lessons. And somewhere between the first and last chapter, I began to forgive. It's been 2 years since then. My book now sits on a shelf among others, forgotten by most but precious to me. Sometimes I still drive down to the coast. I visit the old cliffs, watch the waves crash below, and think about the 2 women who shaped me, one through love, the other through truth. When I close my eyes, I can hear my mother's voice again, soft and unsteady. You were the best thing I ever did wrong. And maybe she was right. Because from her mistake I found my purpose: to tell stories like ours, to remind people that even the ugliest truths can bloom into something beautiful when faced with honesty. When I tell people this story now, they often ask me one question: do you forgive her? The truth is, forgiveness isn't something that arrives all at once. It doesn't come wrapped in clarity or peace. It comes in small moments, when I hear her laugh in my memory, when I catch the scent of lavender in the air, when I pick up a book she once loved and find her notes in the margins. It comes when I realize that I carry her in me, not just her mistakes, but her mercy too. My mother's lie shaped my life, but her love shaped who I became. And between those 2 truths is where I choose to live. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that every family has a story told in whispers, and sometimes the only way to heal is to speak it aloud. Secrets may protect people for a time, but in the end, they wound the ones they're meant to shield. So if you've ever uncovered a truth you weren't ready for, if someone you love has failed you in a way that feels unforgivable, take a breath. Remember that love, even when broken, still leaves light behind. I no longer see my story as one of betrayal. It's a story of people doing their best with hearts too human to be perfect. Tell me, if you were in my place, if you discovered your mother's lie was born out of love, would you forgive her too? And if this story found a piece of your own heart along the way, maybe take a moment to share it or just sit with it. Sometimes that's how healing begins. You know, sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that live closest to your heart. Sitting here, thinking back on my mother's story and my own, I realize forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 moments, scattered across years, arriving softly when the hurt finally gives way to understanding. For a long time, I was angry. Angry at the lie, angry at how it shaped my days and shadowed my memories. But with each passing season, I've come to learn that nobody means to hurt the ones they love most. Sometimes love asks us to carry more than we expect, and sometimes it asks us to let go. I realize now, we're all more complicated than we first seem. My mother hid the truth to keep her world together. She broke my heart, yes, but she also built it. And all her hidden hopes, her silent guilt, her desperate choices. They wove the fabric of the woman I am. If there's any wisdom I've found, it's this: we are always more than the worst thing we've done, and the people we love are sometimes the ones we most need to forgive. So let me ask you, if you had been in my place, would you have forgiven her? Would you keep her secret, or choose to speak the truth, even if it meant breaking your own heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below, your stories, your questions, your moments of healing. I read every word because these stories aren't just mine, they're yours too. There's space here for your voice, your truth, your pain, and your forgiveness. If this story touched you, if it made you remember your own journey or helped you see someone else's with gentler eyes, please Like this video. It helps others find their way to our little circle. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story we share together. And if there's someone in your life who might find comfort in these words, don't hesitate. Share this video with them. You never know whose heart you could be lighting up tonight. Would you have done what I did, or would you have chosen another path entirely? Let me know below. Thank you for sitting with me and trusting me with your time, your thoughts, and a little bit of your heart. Until next time, may you find truth gentle enough to heal and love strong enough to forgive.